All right, so are you ready? Today we're diving deep into the life of Hunter Biden.
Son of President Joe Biden.
You got it. And we've got 3 sources to pull from. Hunter Biden's Wikipedia page.
Okay.
An article from FOX 26 in Houston about the fallout from his pardon.
Interesting.
And a CBS News piece about how President Biden might be responding to the controversy surrounding the pardon.
I'm ready. Let's hear it.
Okay, perfect.
Yep.
Well, I know you've probably heard bits and pieces about Hunter Biden, international business deals,
Right.
struggles with addiction,
Yeah.
that laptop.
Of course.
But we're going to put it all together today.
I like it.
We'll see if we can connect the dots and just what the full picture looks like.
It's fascinating, isn't it? I mean, his life just intersects with all these major global events.
It really does.
It's almost like a political thriller.
Yeah, for sure. But before we get to all that, let's rewind to the beginning.
Okay.
Back to the beginning. So Hunter Biden was born in 1970,
Okay.
but his early years were marked by real tragedy.
Yeah.
In 1972, he and his brother Beau were seriously injured in a car crash that killed their mother and sister.
Wow.
Hunter suffered a fractured skull.
Gosh, that's awful.
It's just hard to imagine going through something like that at such a young age.
Absolutely. And I mean, he's spoken about this later. He's
Wow.
connected it to his struggles with addiction
Yeah.
later in life. And, that kind of trauma early on can have a profound and lasting impact.
Yeah, it definitely puts things into perspective.
It does.
So after graduating from Yale Law School,
Okay.
Hunter's career path takes a couple of interesting turns.
All right.
First, he lands a job at MBNA,
MBNA.
a bank holding company. But here's where it gets interesting.
Okay.
MBNA was a major donor to his father's Senate campaigns.
Mm.
So, I mean, do you think that connection raises any red flags?
Well, it's something to think about, right? I mean, this situation really highlights how blurry the lines can be between family ties and politics and business. And that's something that's going to pop up again and again in Hunter's story.
Right. And reportedly, there was an understanding between Hunter and his father to not really discuss his lobbying clients.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. But things really heat up when we get to his international business dealings,
Okay.
especially 2 ventures that have generated a lot of controversy.
Okay.
The first is BHR Partners,
BHR Partners.
which is the Chinese private equity fund, where Hunter held a 10% stake.
Okay, and this is the one that Trump and his supporters were really talking about
Yes.
during the campaign,
Yes.
saying that Hunter walked out of China with $1.5 billion.
Right. And that's the figure that was reported in the Wall Street Journal as their fundraising targets,
Right.
but not actually what he was paid out.
Exactly.
So yeah, that number's significantly lower, but the timing was still questionable to some
Right.
because Hunter acquired his stake in 2017, although he later resigned from the board.
Yeah.
He retained ownership until 2022.
So he was still involved even though he wasn't on the board.
Yes.
It creates that appearance of a conflict of interest, given his father's position.
Exactly.
And then there's his role on the board of Burisma Holdings.
Yes, Burisma Holdings.
The Ukrainian natural gas company.
He joined in 2014 while Joe Biden was vice president.
Wow, the tagging on that one.
I know, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Burisma was owned by Mykola Zlochevsky,
Okay.
who's an oligarch facing a money laundering investigation. And Hunter's role was to advise on corporate governance and U.S. expansion.
Interesting.
And he was making up to $50,000 a month.
Wow. So this is where that potential conflict of interest really comes into play.
Yes.
Because Joe Biden was deeply involved in U.S.-Ukraine policy.
Right.
He even advocated for the removal of Viktor Shokin,
Right.
Ukraine's top prosecutor, who was widely seen as corrupt.
And of course, this is what fueled the Biden-Ukraine conspiracy theory
Right.
that Trump and Giuliani were pushing, saying that Joe Biden wanted Shokin out to protect Hunter and Burisma.
Right.
But multiple investigations and reports from sources like the Washington Post and the New York Times.
Reputable sources.
Yes. Very reputable sources have found no evidence of wrongdoing by Hunter Biden.
Wow.
And they made it very clear that Shokin's removal was supported by both the U.S. and the EU
Okay.
as part of a larger effort to combat corruption in Ukraine.
So it was seen as a step that had to happen.
Right.
But the narrative just didn't stop spreading,
It didn't.
especially with the boost it got from partisan politics and certain media outlets.
Right. It's a good example of how quickly misinformation can spread.
Yeah.
And speaking of misinformation, let's get to that infamous laptop.
Okay.
So this story broke in October 2020.
Right before the election.
Yes, just weeks before the presidential election. And the story goes that a laptop was left at a repair shop.
Okay.
And it allegedly contained emails that implicated Joe Biden's involvement with Burisma.
Interesting.
But right from the start, the whole thing was shrouded in suspicion.
Ah, yes, the classic October surprise.
Right.
A lot of people in the media and even intelligence officials were questioning the authenticity.
Right.
They thought it might be Russian disinformation.
Yeah, and it took a while for things to settle down,
Right.
and the FBI only confirmed that the laptop actually belonged to Hunter
Okay.
and contained authentic files in January of 2024.
So almost 3 years of speculation
Yeah.
and debate.
Exactly. And then, ironically, the laptop ended up playing a role in a legal case against Hunter,
Okay.
but for a completely different reason.
Okay.
So rewind back to 2013.
Okay.
Hunter decides to join the Navy Reserve at 43 years old.
Wow. He was 43.
He was 43, and he even gets age and drug-related waivers to enlist.
Okay.
But then things take a very unexpected turn.
Oh, boy.
Just weeks after being sworn in by his father, a urinalysis detects cocaine in his system,
Oh, wow.
and he ends up being discharged in 2014.
Wow. And what did he say about that?
So his explanation was that the cigarettes he was smoking were laced with cocaine,
Oh, really?
and he chose not to appeal the discharge because he said he was afraid of the media frenzy
Right.
that would follow.
He was already under so much scrutiny
Exactly.
because of his family name and all these business dealings.
Right. And unfortunately for Hunter, his legal troubles weren't over.
Oh, no.
In 2018, federal investigations into his tax affairs begin,
Oh, okay.
initially focusing on potential money laundering, but later shifting to tax-related issues.
Okay, and this is where the laptop comes back in.
Yes,
Right.
this is where the laptop comes back in because the FBI used evidence from the laptop to build their case against Hunter,
Okay.
which led to a plea deal in June 2023.
Okay.
He pleaded guilty to 2 misdemeanor tax charges and agreed to a pretrial diversion program for a felony gun charge.
A gun charge.
Yeah, the gun charge stemmed from a firearm he possessed in 2018 while he was struggling with drug addiction.
Okay.
It seemed like this plea deal might finally be an end to all of his legal trouble.
Okay.
But then in July 2023, there's another turn of events.
What happened?
The judge actually rejects the plea deal,
Oh, wow.
expressing concerns about the immunity it offered from potential future charges.
Mm-hmm.
And Hunter ends up changing his plea to not guilty. And then in August, a special counsel is appointed to oversee the investigation.
Really? So that signaled that the case was not over.
Right.
It was actually maybe even expanding into
Yeah.
violations of the Foreign Agents Registration Act.
Right, so it's a real roller coaster.
It is a roller coaster.
And all of this is happening while his father is president of the United States.
Wow, that's got to be a lot of pressure.
It's just hard to imagine the political pressure that must have been building during all of this.
Absolutely. And it's really impossible to separate his legal battles from the larger political landscape.
Yeah.
These investigations just intensify the partisan attacks,
Right.
with Republicans saying that the Biden administration was protecting Hunter from accountability.
Right.
And then the tension just keeps escalating as his trials approach.
His gun trial in Delaware began in June 2024,
Okay.
and he is found guilty on all 3 felony counts.
Wow, what a bombshell.
He was.
I mean, he was the first child of a sitting U.S. president to ever be convicted of a felony.
I know. And then with all this pressure, his tax trial in California was approaching.
Right.
And in a last-minute twist, he decides to change his plea to guilty on all 9 charges.
Really?
He was hoping to avoid another lengthy trial.
So that was the plea deal.
Yeah. It did seem to bring the legal saga to a close.
Uh-huh.
But it was still controversial because it involved an Alford plea,
An Alford plea.
where Hunter acknowledged the strength of the evidence against him while still maintaining his innocence.
So there's still that question about whether his family name was giving him some kind of preferential treatment.
Right.
It's hard to say.
It is. And then just when you thought the story couldn't get any crazier,
What happened?
on December 1st, 2024, President Biden issued a full and unconditional pardon for his son,
Wow.
covering all offenses between 2014 and 2024.
So that wiped his legal slate completely clean?
It did no sentencing on the tax and gun charges.
I mean, the timing of this, just days before his scheduled sentencing.
Right.
And it covered an entire decade. It sent shockwaves through the political world.
It really did.
I mean, it just throws fuel on the fire, doesn't it?
It does.
About presidential power.
Yeah.
And whether the justice system really does treat everyone equally.
So before we move on, what are your initial takeaways from what we've covered so far?
For me, Hunter Biden's life is almost like a microcosm of how complicated American society really is.
Okay.
We see the power, the privilege, the ambition, but also the human flaws
Yeah.
that can really derail even those who seem to have it all.
It's a fascinating story.
It is.
But it's also kind of a warning.
Yes.
It highlights how blurry the lines can get between personal and political life.
Right.
Between public image and private struggles.
Absolutely.
It's a story with so many twists and turns and layers.
So many layers.
That it's hard to even wrap your head around it.
It is. Yeah, it's been anything but simple.
Yeah, that's putting it mildly.
The reaction to the part,
Yeah, and our sources highlight some pretty harsh criticism from both sides of the aisle, with a lot of people really concerned about this potential for abuse of power.
Right.
And what this means for the justice system.
Exactly. And Representative Dean Phillips.
A Democrat from Minnesota.
Right, a Democrat.
He didn't mince words at all.
Yeah. What did he say?
He basically accused both Biden and Trump of using the pardon power just to their own advantage.
Wow. So he's calling out both sides.
He is. And he even called for reforms.
What kind of reforms?
He argued that certain Americans are indeed above the law, and that influence is always for sale.
Wow, those are some strong words.
They're strong words coming from someone in Biden's own party.
Yeah, it is. It points to those bigger concerns about fairness and accountability.
Exactly.
That this pardon has kind of stirred up.
Right. And on the other side of the aisle, Republican Representative Tom Emmer.
From Minnesota?
Also from Minnesota.
Okay.
He jumped at the chance to take a shot at Biden.
What did he say?
He tweeted, "No one is above the law unless your last name is Biden."
Oh, wow. That's a pretty pointed remark.
Yeah.
It emphasizes how divisive this whole thing has become.
Yeah. And we can't forget President-elect Trump's response on Truth Social.
Right.
He suggested that Biden should have pardoned the January 6th protesters instead.
Really? So it's like this pardon has become a political football.
It really has.
Being tossed back and forth.
Exactly.
Between the two parties.
Yeah, it really highlights how politicized everything has become.
It does.
But let's shift gears a bit and talk about some of Hunter's more recent activities.
Okay.
Besides all the legal drama, he's actually become quite the artist.
Oh, yeah. He's had some success in the art world.
I've heard that, yeah.
His paintings are selling for as much as $500,000 each.
Wow, that's a pretty impressive price tag.
It is.
I wonder if his name recognition plays a role in that.
It's possible. I mean, there has been some scrutiny around these sales, especially concerns about conflicts of interest.
Oh, I so.
Well, because some of the buyers have ties to the government.
Oh, so raises the question, are people buying the art because of the art?
Right.
Or are they hoping for some kind of access?
The power.
Exactly. It's just yet another layer of complexity.
It is.
In this whole story.
Right, blurring those lines between art and business and political influence.
Exactly. And then, of course, we can't forget about Hunter's personal life.
Right, which has been just as turbulent as his professional life.
His personal life has been marked by love and loss.
Yeah.
He has 5 children from different relationships.
5 children, wow.
Including a daughter from a paternity lawsuit.
Oh, right, that grabbed headlines.
It did.
Yeah.
And his battles with drug and alcohol abuse have also been widely reported.
Which he links back to those early family tragedies.
Yeah.
It's just a good reminder that behind all those political headlines, there's a human story there.
There is, with real pain and complexity.
Exactly.
And he even wrote a memoir.
He did.
Yeah, called Beautiful Things.
Okay.
Where he talks about his experiences with addiction and his path to recovery.
That's interesting. It's a very raw and honest account I've heard about the toll that addiction can take.
Okay.
And how hard it is to overcome.
So as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, what are your main takeaways?
You know, it's interesting. For me, Hunter Biden's life, it's almost like a microcosm of how complicated American society really is.
Okay.
We see that intersection of power and privilege and ambition, but then also those human flaws that can derail even those who seem to have it all.
Yeah. And how do you think Hunter Biden's story and this, are going to impact everyday people?
Well, I think what's really concerning is the potential impact on public trust in the justice system.
Right.
I mean, if people feel like the rules don't apply to everyone, that those in power get special treatment, it can be incredibly damaging.
And it makes you wonder if something like this can happen at the highest levels of government.
Yeah.
What does that say about the system?
As a whole, it raises those questions about accountability and transparency.
Yeah.
And I think it also feeds into that growing sense of disillusionment that people feel towards the American political system.
Yeah.
It reinforces that idea that there's one set of rules for the elite and another set for everyone else.
Yeah, it's hard to argue with that.
It is.
This entire saga really underscores the need for greater transparency,
yes,
holding people accountable,
yeah,
and a real commitment to upholding the rule of law.
Regardless of who you are
Exactly.
or who you're connected to.
And achieving that requires a joint effort.
It does.
From both sides of the political spectrum.
Absolutely.
Working together to find that common ground.
Right.
Rejecting that divisive rhetoric.
Yeah.
Focusing on solutions that actually benefit everyone.
Jack said.
Not just a select few.
Well said.
This has been a wild ride.
It has.
Full of unexpected twists and turns.
What's that many?
But as we head into the final part of our deep dive, what are your thoughts on where we go from here?
Well, I think the big question is, where do we go from here?
Yeah, this pardon really throws a wrench into things.
It does. Legally speaking, it can't be overturned.
Not even by
about Trump.
Incoming President Trump.
It's a done deal.
Wow. But I imagine the political fallout is far from over.
Oh, absolutely. The timing is just going to fuel more accusations of corruption and abuse of power.
Especially with the transition of power.
Exactly. It plays right into that narrative that Trump and his supporters have been pushing.
Right. And how do you think this might affect the incoming administration's agenda?
Well, I think it's possible that we could see some investigations or attempts to kind of rehash Hunter's past.
Yeah. What do you think that would look like?
It's hard to say, but Trump has already hinted at, going after the Bidens legally.
Right.
And this pardon could just embolden those efforts. Yeah. We could see congressional investigations, attempts to appoint special counsels, maybe even calls for impeachment.
Yeah.
Although that seems unlikely given the divided Congress.
It does sound like pardon could have a ripple effect for years to come.
It really could. It's a stark reminder that, these actions taken in the political sphere often have these unintended consequences that can impact so many lives.
It's a lot to process, but what does it all mean for us? The everyday people, just trying to understand what's going on.
I think it highlights that growing sense of disillusionment with the American political system.
Okay.
There's a perception that the rules just don't apply equally to everyone.
Right.
That those in power play by a different set of rules.
It's hard to disagree with that sentiment.
Yeah.
This whole saga really emphasizes the need for greater transparency, accountability,
absolutely,
and a commitment to the rule of law.
Absolutely. And that's a challenge that's going to require effort from both sides.
Right.
It's about finding common ground, rejecting that divisive rhetoric, and focusing on solutions that actually benefit everyone.
Not just a select few.
Right.
This has been quite a deep dive.
It has.
Full of twists and turns. But any final thoughts for our listeners?
I think Hunter Biden's story, even with all of the controversy, reminds us that even with immense privilege and power, we are all human.
Yeah.
We all make mistakes. We struggle, and we have the capacity for redemption.
That's a good point.
It's a reminder that empathy and understanding are crucial.
Yeah.
Even when we're dealing with people whose actions we might disagree with.
Beautifully said. It's a reminder that we should all try to see beyond the headlines.
Yeah.
And recognize that shared humanity that connects us all.
Exactly.
And on that note, we'll leave you with this thought. Does Hunter Biden's story reveal deeper truths about the intersection of power, family, and justice in American society? It's something to think about as we all try to navigate this ever-changing political landscape. And thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep seeking the truth.